so we can get things going. All right. Any questions coming out of a little break there? I'm sorry. We're just going to do that one break, and then we'll come. We'll be done by 8-ish or so, I imagine. No questions. Okay. I'm going to share up the PowerPoint that I shared up with you on As You Learn. And we're going to use this as a little bit of a guide, but realizing that there's a lot of different thought processes that people get into in terms of leadership. I can get the screen to go somewhere. There we go. Bingo. All right. I'm not going to pop it up in an animation screen, slideshow screen, because we're not going to go through the whole thing since we're not getting into everything. Plus, you don't have the whole PowerPoint. There's a few more slides to it that are more related to the part of the text material that you haven't had a chance to read yet. So I just kind of limited what came up. But there is another set of theories that help us to kind of define what we talk about leadership, what we mean by leadership. And these aren't necessarily modes. Modes, I think, are more about particular perceptions and strengths that individuals bring to the mix, whereas theories of leadership are just general statements about what we think are characteristics of effective leaders in different scenarios and in different fields. And so I think it's important to kind of deal with that just a little bit so that we can cross-layer these two. We can talk about leadership modes, and we talk about leadership theories, and we can kind of come to some sort of notion about what are the characteristics within those things. The two goals of what will now be this session and the next session, including goals that are related to the next session, will have you to think about how you feel about various theories of school leadership as they might be useful or relate to school improvement planning, and also to talk about what you have learned, or what you're being taught, or what you have read about leadership, and kind of put the more formal discussion of theories in relation to those notions. First, we have to kind of see what your perception is of theory. I mean, when you hear theory, I mean, what does that conjure up for you? I mean, what is a theory? What makes it a theory?
Are we free to answer?
Yeah.
At least to me, I think about theory as, again, when you have the idea, and then application comes when you put something into practice. Oh my Lord, it's right on the slide. But I really, again, that point where it's like you have these big ideas of things that might explain something, especially if it's like you can't necessarily find all the parts of it, but you have like pictures and pieces of the puzzle. So like that theory gives you the remaining pieces. And then once you have that, I think that's where the application piece comes next. You can take what you have and put it together.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. Anyone else?
I've always viewed it as kind of a malleable hypothesis that you're willing to stake a claim to or claim on. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Duncan says is you have a stake in it. I think, but it can
Okay.
be fluid. You can change
Okay.
with what you learn.
All right. Yeah. Other thoughts? And I'm going to kind of combine those two thoughts there just a little bit. Um, and once again, this is my perception. My perception is that theory is always somewhat related to notions of sort of cause and effect. Give you an example, that we can affect student outcomes in a positive way by encouraging parental intervention or parental involvement. So if we have increased parental involvement, then we can have a positive impact on student achievement. If we have whatever we have, I mean, if we have better trained teachers that are trained in a particular way of dealing with discipline, then we'll have better classroom management. And so there's always like two pieces to it. And Stephen, in terms of your notions about a hypothesis, yeah, that essentially that's what a hypothesis is. That there is an element, some variable, some factor, something that has an effect, either positive, negative, or directionally on something else. If we make this better, this will happen. Or if if you jump off a roof, it depends on how high the roof is. But say you jump off a two-story roof, I've got pretty much a theory that says most of the time you're dead. Even that's a theory. Now, is it one we want to test? I'm not so sure, but it's a theory because there is a causative component to it, and there's an outcome or an effect component to it. And theories can be very complex. They have many, many, many elements to them, or they can be very simple. But it is a kind of a reading or an understanding or a take on how a system of some sort, and by system I'm using the engineering definition, which is we're talking about a individual, an individual incident, but there is a notion that okay, if we do this, this will happen, or we'll get better outcomes if we do this. Now, there's also an understanding in the theory that they're not perfect and they're not 100% reliable. That theory has a contextual element to it, and it also has, it depends upon the context, the type of school, the type of students, the type of whatever, type of community, and so there are some contextual pieces to it. It's constructivist in nature. We'll talk more about constructivist in just a second. But theories are they suffer from kind of there are theories to things, and then there's that actual practice piece, as Duncan was sort of beginning to get to there before he scared himself away from it. But yeah, it is that idea that if we think certain things are related, and if we do certain things, certain outcomes will occur, or what happens when we actually put that in practice. Now, that's the part that involves, sort of ongoing action, research model, sort of improvement, collection of data, all those things. But, if we take a theory and we put it into practice, does it work? Or does it work in all scenarios? Or does it work only in certain scenarios? Or does it work, among certain groups of students and not on other groups of students? We are in the middle of situation over the last 20 years, 20, 25 years, where we have literally, in most parts of the country, resegregated our school systems. And we've done that through, local school models, neighborhood school models. We've done that through, schools are built where people live, and as a society, we've sort of, to a certain level, segregated ourselves by income level and ethnicity and all that. And so the outcome of that is that schools have resegregated. Now, is that a detriment? Is it a detriment that we have resegregated schools, or do you disagree with that? Do you not see that? Do you not see the same sort of data that I see about the incidence of students of color being having more discipline referrals, being referred more often to exceptional student status, being suspended more often? I mean, there's every feasible way of looking at different characteristics in the school, but under the model that we have evolved in the last 25 years, schools are segregated again. And how do we do that? I don't guess it matters how we did it. I mean, we are where we are. I hate that phrase, but particularly after somebody else used it in a bad context. But it's what's in front of us. And so what is it that we do to do something about that? How do we deal with that? How do we, is it something we need to do? Is there a theory that will help us get there? And so theory is always something that's kind of malleable, as Stephen said. I mean, theories evolve. And at any one given point, you might have multiple theories about why certain things are going on, because different people might be looking at it with different perceptions or coming from different angles. And so, a theory doesn't mean that it's true. It just means here's one process with some information perhaps, but here's one process or one circumstance that we need to understand, and here's one way of thinking about it. And so it relates, in my mind, theory relates to practice only in so much as practice demonstrates that the theory has merit. And if practice doesn't demonstrate that the theory has merit, then that theory is, in my mind, flawed or stinks or whatever term you want to put on it. But it's not a great theory because it doesn't work. Give you an economic example. For the last 40 years, 35 or 40 years, we've been operating under an economic system in this country that by and large says that there's a optimal tax level. And if you hit that optimal tax level, you balance governmental resources with societal needs. The Laffer theory, if you want to, and Laffer, I think, is a good description of the theory. You might know it by a more political name, trickle down. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is that we keep shoveling, more resource to people that have means and people that look a lot like us in general. Though we don't get an equal share most of the time. And supposedly, the other part of the Laffer theory is a rising tide floats all boats. But has that theory worked when we have the biggest income, biggest economic disparity we've had in 50 or 75 years right now?
I would say no.
Yeah, well, I think any objective look at it would probably be a no. But, you know, that was a theory. And we ran government by theory. And so, you know, that's why theories are important. They are meaningful things only in so much that practice proves them to be viable. Up until the point that practice no longer proves them to be viable. And then the theory needs to be changed.
The trickle down reminds me kind of and I don't know if this is a thing or not, but confirmation bias. I think
different way of
someone
thinking.
in power like can keep pushing something until they almost make it become true. But we know that trickle down doesn't work. It agrees a lot of reason trickle down doesn't work. But I think some theories can be shoved in front of you, and especially within education, until it's just pushed down your throat. And I don't know if people are looking for correlation or what, but I think some of them are pushed on us without having merit. Many theories, or at least a lot of in education that I've seen.
Yeah, there are, you know, theories come from, I mean, educational innovations and educational changes come from many different places. And unfortunately, over the last couple of decades or so, they've come more from the political arena than they've come from the research arena. I mean, we really don't. You know, here's the thing. One of the things that kind of still bothers me at night when I think about, you know, the past several years in education. I got to do something with the light here just a second. And it's hot. And so if I do something foolish, like an old man does sometimes, and touch something hot, I will probably get burned. And so let me just turn the thing off. Yeah, we have become more politicized. And so, you know, we kind of think of them as groundswell movements, that it's what parents want, or it's what, you know, it's what you know, educators want, or whatever. But in reality, it's kind of manufactured in a certain way to serve certain constituencies in a political way. And you know, give you an example. You know, what was the dude from Texas that was the Secretary of Education under Bush?
Spelling, wasn't that her name?
No, not Margaret Spelling, but
Okay.
the guy that preceded her. Anyhow, he was a superintendent of instruction in Texas before he was made Secretary of Education. And you know, we had kind of gotten to the point where we saw teaching reading as a combination of a couple of different theories. There was a theory that talked about you know, character recognition and all those things, and word recognition and all that sort of had a way of thinking in a very structured way what kids need to do in order to read. And then there was a whole bunch of theories that had to do with getting kids just to read a lot, so that you deal with a, you know, passion for reading, and also you know, the you know, quest to understand. And plus they confirm, but reading at their level. And you know, there was a debate about phonics or whole reading instruction and things like that. I mean, lots of debates about that. And so when this guy comes in, they begin to push a very heavy dependence on phonics and on programmed reading, because they assumed that the reason that students weren't literate at the level that we'd hope they would be is because teachers weren't very good at it. And you know, we could create a, you know, program reading series type things, and we could, you know, teach kids to read better doing that, put them on a computer or put them in a little pamphlet book or whatever, and that would work better. And they pushed that for 2 or 3 years. And so a lot of schools went to these program reading guides and models. In fact, you probably have some of them in your schools now that are sitting back and collecting dust in a storage room because, one, they're out of date, and two, they weren't done by individual student reading levels too well. And three, any that use technologies is totally obsolete now. So the ones that are out there now are a little bit better, though marginally.
But Dr. Bolt, being a primary grades teacher, I agree with you on the influx of systems, but it also seems very cyclical. And when we talk about like the pendulum swing and things like that, or at least from a early reading perspective, we'll argue like a whole language learning, or we'll argue a phonetic learning. And again, like especially as a multi-generation educator, like my mother was my grandfather, and so on and so on. Like you can see these trends repeating themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Of what the emphasis is placed on.
Yeah, but where we had arrived about 20, 30 years ago was that it was really a combination of both. That you wanted literacy, but you also wanted comprehension. And the way you get comprehension is by getting kids engaged in reading and writing. And let's not dwell on a few misspellings, or let's not dwell on whatever. That it's important to get those things right, but it's also important not to have them not want to read or not want to write because they're having difficulty getting those elements right, those structural elements right. And so reading programs around the country at the university level, they started teaching reading teachers. It was really a combination of both, and we were turning out, and we were beginning to see jumps in literacy and things like that. And then we went back, swung way back the other way with this guy. But what happened about 2 or 3 years in, I don't think he made it a full 4 years, but he resigned at some point. The reason they all resign is spend more time with their family. He resigned to spend more time with his family. Well, he immediately went back to Texas and took a job on the board of one of these program reading companies, which he had been on the board of kind of secretly the whole time.
Well, stuff like that, and I'm not much on conspiracies, but we don't know the depths of how much money was changed hands into getting these programs within the school.
Yeah.
Someone probably made a lot of money off these things that that we didn't know about.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying sometimes there are political motivations, and sometimes there are more prurient motivations, and the fact that motivations aren't based on research is kind of bothersome, because we know better how to do some things than we used to know several years back, because the research is over a period of 50 years. I mean, we've kind of figured a few of these things out, and now we're at a point where we're having to deal with the fallout from that. But that's what theory is, something that is transient, it is malleable, and it's only as good as practice proves it to be. So anytime you see a theory, you have to kind of operate on that notion. Now, in education, we are by and large mostly social constructivism. I mean, if you ask 100 teachers what they believed in, you would probably get 85 or 90, if not more, that would give you a definition that you would categorize under social constructivism. In that, leadership is not an objective thing. It's not a point scale thing. It's not a something you can check off on a checklist. It is about negotiating. It is about calling into practice prior experiences, research that you've read, literature, things you learn at conferences, all that sort of stuff. And the way in which we kind of think about leadership is that perceptions of the people the leader is leading really determine if the leader is effective or not. And so there's not an external effectiveness scale in school leadership, although every state has one. It really doesn't work that way. The way in which you identify people that are really strong, solid readers is if the people that they are leading perceive them to be strong, solid leaders. And so there is a perception piece from it. And the way in which practice changes in a school is that that leader draws upon the feedback from the followers, i.e. the teachers. And so when I go into any school, this is typically what I will see. The guy that's rigid and right down the line, there are fewer and fewer of those. And what we now kind of envision as being, I'm not being critical of this at all, what we envision as being leadership is really in a social constructivism sort of model. And the key name that comes to that is Vygotsky, as a theory or a theoretician in education that a lot of people model themselves after and follow. And so that becomes sort of the nature of school leadership today is very much along that sort of model. Agree? Disagree? Any examples one way or the other?
I would just say again, off that third point, I think we all would, as a diverse group of future leaders, we would probably all have had very different experience of what we would say good leadership and bad leadership looks like.
Yeah, you would have, but that'd be based on your perceptions.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, there's,
so that's, I agree.
Even with, there might be some general consensus on what all of the quote unquote good or bad practices are.
Right.
It's all based off our individual worldview.
Yeah, it always is. And that's here's the other side effect of that. If your perceptions are about, if your perceptions about the leader in whatever scenario it is, building, division, organization, whatever, if your perceptions about that leader are negative, then it is quite likely that you will perform qualitatively a little bit less than if your perceptions are positive. Because you can't separate your perceptions from your reactions and the things that you do. And that always is the conundrum, is, okay, if I have to take a stand here and I'm kind of a bit of a hard ass on this, what's going to happen? Or do I have enough cachet in this organization, in this building, or in this division to do that? Can I take a stand every now and then? And will my people understand why? And once again, I think it's a communication sort of issue as much as anything. I mean, people can understand when you have to make hard decisions if they understand the context of the hard decision. And then you can move ahead with what you have to do if people at least understand what that is that you need to be doing. So it is if I were to think about, okay, what is the leadership model that we have in schools today? It really is a sort of a social constructivism model. Now, there might be others, and I could be totally off base here, but I know a lot of people in a lot of schools, and this seems to be the model of those folks that are most successful. Yeah. Let me get that. Okay. Crippen talks about what he calls a servant leadership. And this model is very often seen in public schooling. It is fairly often seen in charter schools that have a particular focus around sort of the notion of serving, or private schools that have the same notion. Typically, public schools are kind of the notion of why we have public schools is so that we can develop a skilled workforce and maximize people's learning, and that's primarily, and it's a little bit of balance the scale sort of thing, but it has been for a long time the notion of building a skilled workforce. And so there's been an economic component to public school leadership. But you will find in some elements of education, not normally in public schools, this notion of servant leadership. And it's based on a theory, and Crippen uses some clipped little statements to talk about that theory. And the primary quote that everybody talks about when you talk about Crippen is first to serve, then to lead. And so it's kind of the notion of leading from the front, but exposing yourself to everything you're expecting your followers to be exposed to. And so you put the needs of the other folks in the organization in front of your own to empower the organizational culture. It's not terribly goal oriented unless your followers have a goal. Unless, let's say, you're in a building, a little private school where you're kind of using the servant model, and you kind of have the big meetings, or the big meeting where you ask your faculty, what is it that you would like for us to accomplish this year? What is your goal? What are the goals for the year? Let's see if we can identify, 3 or 4 goals for the school within our mission, within our strategic model, which is based on service. And if you can identify some goals, then those are the ones you kind of go after. One of the earliest examples of the servant leadership sort of model was Maria Montessori School. People sometimes forget that Maria Montessori was a doctor. She was one of the first female doctors in France, or trained in France. And so when she established her schools, it was in one of the worst slum areas of the city. And because she had a notion that she wanted to serve all students. And so that was built around a service model, and she was right out front with that, and she promoted it, and she recruited people for that. And so she was leading the charge there. But it wasn't terribly goal oriented, because they realized, and as Piaget did some research there, also Alfred Binet, so we know how that turned out in IQ tests and eventually SATs and ACTs and all that sort of stuff. That Piaget was one of the interviewers for Alfred Binet, and so he was actually interviewing students. And while he was interviewing students in Maria Montessori School and talking with her, he began to realize that students were developmentally different, that they went through, different developmental stages. And so that was the beginning of his developmental model. But a servant leader also realizes that different students will develop at different paces if it's in a school. They will develop in slightly different ways. They will not all develop in the same pipeline, and not all will have the same sequence of events. And so it's important to look at individual students to understand, how they need to maximize their potential. And so the power in a servant leadership model actually resides within the teachers, but also within the students and parents. Because the leader of the organization is actually only there to try to maximize, everything for what their followers and the students and parents might want to see. And they're not the one that stands up and gives big speeches and things like that. They're the ones that just maximize. So it's a different sort of leadership. Any of you have been exposed to sort of anyone using, or an organization using sort of this servant leadership model? You see it a lot of times in churches and relief organizations and things like that too. Salvation Army. Yeah, go ahead, Lakeisha.
I was just answering your question. Like, that's what the principal I have, that's one of his main components is servant leadership, and it works at our school.
Yeah, and it works at lots of places that are not quote unquote the traditional schools. I mean, and at a school like the one that Lakeisha works with, where students are coming with different needs and different issues to have to be dealt with. I mean, you are almost required to deal with students as individuals. And so the servant model works extremely well in settings like that. But once again, this person had to have some other skills too to kind of translate into the more formal model that most of the rest of the school division is operating on. But it is an effective leadership model in certain circumstances. It's just not one you see a lot in public schools because of all the, the goals are kind of established for you. You don't really get to think about your goals all that much. And characteristics of a servant leader, very good at listening, empathy, healing, making people feel better, recover from trauma. A lot of the trauma-based stuff that we our trauma mediation stuff that we now talk about in schools, a lot of that was in early Montessori school models before they became the haven for rich people, and things like that. Then they've kind of have been reinvigorated in different Montessori models and things like that. But it's this idea of helping people heal, helping people deal with kind of normal trauma in their lives. Awareness of the people around them, the ability to persuade followers to do different things with students, conceptualization of new ideas, of models that work with different students, thinking in a forward model what those students might be able to do. Stewardship, general stewardship, looking out for the health of the organization, and commitment to growth and building communities, building service communities within the organization and with outside the organization. I mean, those are kind of key.
Well, wouldn't you say this is what a lot of employees are looking for? And I don't see how this can or having a component of being a servant leader could definitely decrease your turnover rate if you can tune yourself into all of these characteristics in addressing your staff. And a lot of people come to, or they want to be at our schools, or they want to be at a place where they feel like they've been heard, and that I can go and talk to my leader and he'll understand what I'm saying. And going to my leader and said, hey, my child is sick and I need to go home. Well, that's your problem, not mine. I have nothing to do with it. So I think if leaders, as this cohort, if we can embody this portion or this concept of being, a servant leader, then I think we'll have a better chance of reaching the good quality employee or staff members who won't mind, going through the trenches as you change the culture of the school.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to, and we'll get a little bit more into this later when we start talking overlay, not tonight, but when we overlay the leadership modes on some of these ideas, these leadership models. The mode, there's a couple of modes at play here, servant leader. And one of them is a very high component of that adaptive mode and that transformative mode. And maybe not so much, their strong points, maybe not necessarily instructional leadership, because that tends to talk about getting everybody on board and in the same model, same way of doing things. And I'm not explaining this real well, but the servant sort of leadership theory, which we know works in certain circumstances really well, requires an individual that is more adaptive and more transformative, and that you need somebody that can have some of those attributes simply to maximize what goes on in your organization. I mean, ultimately we will, in this model, this general education model we live in, we will end up kind of assessing everybody in some way, and that tends to be what we do. But if you have strong adaptive capacity and strong transformative capacity, you can still thrive in a servant leader mode, or excuse me, a servant leader leadership model. But if you don't have those things, it's a little bit more difficult to be successful in that particular model. And I wish we did more of that. I wish we did more of that in general, regular educational settings. Just as, the things that we do with gifted kids and exceptional kids. I'm still in the world of gifted and talented, I guess, in my vernacular. But, what we do with gifted and talented kids, the kind of activities we do and the kind of teaching that we do works perfectly fine with other kids too. But we don't do it. And the research is there, the literature is there. We know that it works. We know that, gifted and talented kids, injecting them into projects and making them very hands-on, and all those sorts of things does increase their capacity to think in critical ways. But it also does the same thing for other students. But we can't do that with 25 kids in a classroom or 30 kids in a classroom or whatever. And so we make accommodations for, we balance off what we know works against what we can feasibly do. And so I guess we think if we serve the kids that are maybe test a little better and seem to be a little bit further along developmentally, then they will serve everybody. I don't know, it's some of the stuff we do, I constantly am trying to figure out, but it is, we live in an environment where we know this works. We just don't have the ability or the commitment or the capacity or the resource to be able to do it all the time. But
I aspire to be a servant leader, but I can see situations where a servant leader can be taken advantage of by employees who would kind of undermine. Well, take stewardship, for example, just the willingness to serve over self-interest. And I get your point as, why doesn't everybody do this? But I think ego has a lot to do with it, and pride, and a couple of other things that with the religions and stuff, see as a vice. But I aspire to be a servant leader and to put others forward. However, I have reflected on it and thought, in certain situations, it will not work as well, especially if there's an adversarial type faculty.
Yeah, you can't have that. I mean, and if I had a principal that actually, when I taught at high school, a principal at high school, and I'd gotten into a little discussion with a parent, and it's a long story, but I won't get into it. But basically, I was in a role in the school where I was out in the community a little bit, placing students in mentorships and work placements and things like that. And so, you know, I'd be out in the community during the day a little bit, a couple of periods during the day. And I had a student, and she had called in and said she was sick. And so I said, okay, you know, just check with your mentor and make sure that they're aware that you're not coming, and you know, all that stuff. And so then I'm out, you know, working with other mentors and other students. I see this girl driving around in a pickup truck with a boyfriend. Now, this is a town where there's only one main street, so it's not like you're gonna, you know, if somebody's out, you're gonna see them because they're on the one main street. And so I, you know, I waved, and you know, when I waved, she just kind of dove for the floor. But you know, I got back to school, and the mentor called up and said, or I called the mentor up and I said, if so and so shows up today, please just send her home, and because she called in sick this morning, and you know, if she's sick, I don't want her going, and if she's not sick, I don't want her to think that she can do this to you. Well, so they did. The lady did. She said the girl called. The girl came in. The lady sent her home. And 7:30 the next morning, I rolled into school, and I got a secretary caught me coming to the building and says the principal needs to see you. So I go to the principal's office, and there is the girl and her mother, and you know, saying, "Oh, she was home with me all day. She was sick. She was home with me all day." I said, "Well, you know, I thought I saw you drive. I thought I saw her driving down the street with so and so in his pickup, and you know, I was right next to him, so it wasn't, you know, like I could miss him, and that sort of thing." And oh, the mother got so mad. I mean, she just kind of blew up, and so the principal asked me to leave. So I got up and left, and he came, you know, he dealt with her, and he came. I went back in. And he said, "Well, I know what you said is true, and I know that you know, there is no when it's between you and a parent, that even if you're right, it's my job to try to remediate the relationship with the parent. And so I'm not going to tell them you were wrong, and I will always support you. But you know, don't, you know, you don't want to get into a confrontation with you know, someone that you don't need to get into the confrontation with, because you know, the only reason they're confrontational is because they know they're wrong. And so, you know, I learned an important message there is just to stay away from those kinds of confrontations. And so it's, you know, it's you know, you can talk about perceptions and all that good stuff, but it is, you know, you need to be aware that there is a possibility, if you go into this servant leadership model, that you will deal with people that are outliers to the model in that particular setting. And you will have teachers that don't buy in. You'll have students that maybe have difficulty buying in. You have parents that don't buy in. I mean, there will always be outliers, and you still have to serve the outliers too. But you know, that can make it difficult. And so you, once again, but you don't, you know, you don't pick fights. You stay out of the fray. You stay out of the ring, so to speak. And you know, you just use the John Lewis, Martin Luther King thing, and always use you know, use non-confrontational models. Try to teach, try to help people through educating them. Try to help people through you know, providing lessons. And I guess that provided a lesson, because the girl didn't call in sick anymore and go to the mentorship. But you know, it was one of my first lessons from a principal who was, you know, supporting me, but at the same time telling me that, okay, this is what you want to stay away from. You don't want the confrontation. We'll do the learning piece, but you don't want to, you know, try to figure out how to do that. Don't do the confrontation piece. But yeah, it's servant model is it takes a lot of skill, and it takes a certain predisposition to be really good at it.
I just want to make sure y'all understand. I'm not saying be 100% servant leadership and that's all. I just want
No.
that you guys understand that I'm saying, this is what I'm saying. You should have some type of ounce of care for your staff and all of your students.
Mhm.
And then whatever you need them to do, whether they want to or not, eventually they will do it. Why? Because they believe that you care. Bottom line.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying 100% servant leadership.
No.
And show them
Yeah.
that you care.
Yeah.
I care about you. I'm concerned about you. And I have this open communication. So if you don't understand why I made this decision, you're free to come ask me and I'll explain why I made this decision. And then we can agree to disagree, but you'll want to return to work the next day. Without that component, hence we have the high turnover rate and people jumping from this school to the next school to the next school to the next school. Prime example, in the school district where I work, people put their name on the transfer list like automatically every year, and I don't understand that. Like
Yeah.
every year, that's what they do, like automatically. And I'm like, I don't put my name on the transfer list unless I believe there's somewhere else that I want to go. But that's like the norm for them. And it blew my mind. Like,
Yeah.
it blew my mind. But the thing is retention, teacher retention, staff retention. And if you show them that you care, then they're willing to work with you no matter what type of student is running through that classroom. They know I
Yeah.
have your support.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to say that you adopt the whole cloth, the model. But you need to have, in fact, all of you will adopt, your leadership, what your leadership profile will look like will be a conglomerate. Now you'll have some predominant influences. You will do certain things because they're predominant influences. But your real leadership model, your leadership, I'll use profile for lack of a better term, your leadership profile will be a combination of different leadership modes and leadership models, leadership theories. Because it's just like the reading thing, phonics is not the whole thing, whole reading is not the whole thing. There's something in between that combines elements of all of that works. And so leadership, you won't be 24 karat, you'll be 12 karat something and 10 karat something else and 2 karat something else. I mean, you'll have different elements of different components of different things melded into you. I did the melded thing just so I could complete the whole metaphor to 24 karat. You'll have a lot of influences melded into you, and you'll just need to understand which ones of those will come to the fore when push comes to shove, when you move into practice. And so it's not necessarily it's not totally a conscious thing, but it's not totally not a conscious thing. And so you may decide that, once again, you have to kind of slide into a different, it's like Carl Jungian model. Carl Jung talked about all the different voices in our heads and the different persona. Well, you may have to slide into, the servant leader model because the situation needs it. I mean, if you're worried about retention, yeah, you got to be a servant leader. If you're worried about students moving at their own pace, yeah, you got to be a servant leader. I mean, you have to be that. And so, there will be a combination in your profile, in your makeup of these different elements. Well, folks, it's about 8 o'clock. I'm not going for 9. I'm too old for that these days. But you know, we'll kind of pick up here after you've had a chance to read, you know, the material, gotten the textbook and had a chance to read the material. And then we will pick up here next time, carry that through. We'll organize the groups. And so, you know, groups, each group send me a piece of paper that says, these are folks that we want to be in this group, or email me, and here's why these folks are in this group. What do they add in terms of representation? What do they add in terms of skill?
So those of us who could care less, do we just wait until that's
Just
done?
wait, yeah, and I'll put
As
you
in
all together.
groups, or
Yeah, I'm thinking there'll be 3 groups. I think there's one large group. Another group, I forget who all emailed me, but there's another group that maybe there might be 3 or 4 in it. And so that means that there will be 3 or 4 left over at the end. So we'll have 3 groups, which is good. That's a good model. Less projects for me if I have to read 3 projects, big projects, that's better than reading 4 big projects.
so we'll know this by next week.
Yeah, as soon as I get the information from you, I'll organize this.
Well, I'm not sending in anything, so that you'll know that you won't receive it.
Okay. You know, I'm kind of thinking what I need to call the other group there. Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. Yeah. All right. Are we good? Is it clear what to read? Alexa, I'll go in and add some indication of weight to assignments.
What should I add?
What? Oh, God.
You can't
Alexa
call my name.
responded. What?
You call me Briggs.
Okay.
Messaging with Alexa is not supported on this device.
It's not supported on that device, so we're okay. Alexa, shut up. Okay. I have trained her to shut up when I tell her to.
I don't do that so well, so you're better off to just call me Briggs.
Dr. Bolt, I just wanted to double check then. So on the 10th, we would do the mission statement and the
that first reflection piece. If you want to take that long to do it, yeah, it's open. It'll be open, and you know, I'll just hold off on. Well, no, I'll respond to the ones that are up there on the 7th, but you know, you have until the 10th. Yeah. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
It's reasonable. We're already running a little behind, but you know, I didn't anticipate the text taking that long. Other thoughts? Concerns? General gripes? Things that should be said in a nasty email? Whatever, I don't care. Once again, you may get tired of this, but I'm just too old to be bothered by most of that. So I won't respond in any negative way to anything. So if you've got an honest complaint, put it out there. That's fine. I'm good. Gets to be too much, I'll retire again. All right. Okay, folks, I'll see you next week. And, you know, try to get some reading done. Get that book, get some reading done, and then we can talk a little bit better about the leadership modes once you have a little bit more clarity to it. Okay. All right, guys. Have a good night.
Hi, everyone.